You know, after the Civil War, America wasn't just faced with rebuilding cities and farms. It was trying to rebuild its very soul. This whole period, which we call Reconstruction, was this incredibly messy, hopeful, and sometimes violent attempt to answer one single, profound question. After tearing itself apart, what kind of nation would the United States choose to become?
Okay, let's start with a question that feels, well, pretty personal. Imagine a deep, traumatic harm has been done right where you live. Some people are calling for forgiveness, to just move on. But the people who were hurt, they're demanding justice, maybe even punishment. How in the world do you balance those two things? And look, this wasn't some thought experiment. This was the exact dilemma facing the entire country back in 1865. That massive dilemma really boiled down to three enormous, very practical questions. First, how do you even let states that literally declared war on you back into the country? Second, what do you do with the guys who led that rebellion? And third, and this was the question that would define everything, what on earth was going to happen to 4 million people who were enslaved one day and legally free the next? Answering these questions, well, that was the fundamental problem of the era. The nation was truly at a crossroads, and every single path forward was just loaded with conflict, with uncertainty, and with the ghosts of the war that had just ended. So, when you hear the word Reconstruction, this is exactly what we're talking about. It's that 12-year window from 1865 to 1877 where the United States was grappling with how to rebuild the South and, for the very first time, figure out how to integrate millions of African Americans into society as free citizens. But here's the kicker. Not everyone agreed on how to do it. I mean, not even close. What you ended up with were three profoundly different visions, and they sparked this fierce political battle for the very soul of the country. You can kind of think of this whole battle as a spectrum. On one end, you had people who wanted to fundamentally change the old rules, the very things that led to the war in the first place. And on the other end, you had people who just wanted to get back to normal as fast as possible, even if that meant kind of ignoring the root problems. And this is where you can really see those competing ideas clash. You had President Lincoln, who was sort of in the middle. His 10% plan was pretty lenient, designed to get the country back together quickly. After he was assassinated, his successor, Andrew Johnson, went for something even more lenient, basically letting the old Southern power structure right back in with just a simple oath. And then, on the complete other end of the spectrum, you had the radical Republicans in Congress. They saw this as a once-in-a-lifetime chance to totally remake the South. They wanted military oversight, punishment for Confederate leaders, and full voting rights for freedmen. This intense political fight between the president and Congress, it actually led to a pretty radical and permanent solution. If they couldn't agree on policy, the radical Republicans decided, fine, we'll just rewrite the actual rulebook of the nation, the Constitution itself. First up was the 13th Amendment. This is the big one that officially and forever abolished the institution of slavery in the United States. If you need a simple way to remember it, just think of one word: free. But, just being free isn't the same thing as being a full citizen with rights. And that's where the 14th Amendment came in. It established that anyone born here is a citizen and, this is crucial, guaranteed every single person equal protection of the laws. That was a revolutionary idea. So the key word for this one: citizens. And finally, the 15th Amendment got right to the heart of political power. It explicitly said that the right to vote couldn't be denied just because of someone's race. So you have free, citizens, vote. These three amendments together, they were nothing short of a constitutional revolution. Okay, so you've got these huge new rules being written up in Washington. But what did that actually look like for people on the ground in the South? How did this incredible change actually play out in their daily lives? Well, one of the most important answers to that question was something called the Freedmen's Bureau. The government created it in 1865, and its mission was, well, it was massive. It was supposed to help 4 million people navigate the incredibly scary and uncertain transition from being property to being free people. It was basically a federal lifeline in a sea of chaos. And look, even though it was always underfunded and faced a ton of opposition, what the Bureau managed to accomplish was, honestly, it was staggering. It handed out food and medical care, it built hospitals, it helped people find jobs, and incredibly, it helped reunite families that had been torn apart by slavery. But maybe its most lasting legacy was in education.
The Bureau helped start thousands of schools, including some that would become major universities like Howard and Fisk.
So, with the protection of federal troops and this new constitutional right to vote, something absolutely unprecedented started to happen. This number you see, 2,000. That's roughly how many Black Americans were elected to public office at the local, state, and even national levels during this period.
I mean, think about that. This was revolutionary. For the very first time, you had Black politicians in the halls of power actually shaping the future of their own communities. Leaders like Senator Hiram Revels were instrumental in creating some of the very first state-funded public school systems in the South. Black citizens weren't just being governed anymore, they were governing.
Of course, you can probably guess that not everyone welcomed these changes, and this led to a lot of new tensions. You've probably heard the term carpetbagger before, right? Well, it was a nasty name that white Southerners used for Northerners who moved south after the war. The name implied they were just opportunists, showing up with nothing but a cheap carpetbag, ready to profit from the South's misery. There's this political cartoon from the era, and the quote on it just perfectly captures that negative view. It shows the carpetbagger is a total hypocrite. Someone who comes to fix everyone else's problems while totally ignoring his own. Now, to be fair, while some were definitely just trying to make a quick buck, a lot of them were also teachers, missionaries, and businessmen who genuinely wanted to help rebuild the South on a new, more equal foundation. But this incredible experimental period of change, it wasn't built to last. The forces that were pushing for that return to normal were getting stronger and stronger, and it all led to the end of the Reconstruction era. So how did it all unravel? Well, it happened bit by bit. All the progress made in the late 1860s and early 70s really depended on one thing: the presence of federal troops to protect those new rights. And the final nail in the coffin came in 1877. There was this messy, disputed presidential election, and a backroom political deal was made. The result? The last of those federal troops were pulled out of the South for good. And the consequences of that decision were immediate, and they were devastating. Without federal troops there for protection, Black voters faced an absolute onslaught of discriminatory laws, intimidation, and just outright violence. The political power they had fought so hard to gain, it pretty much vanished almost overnight. Which brings us to the big question, the one we're still wrestling with today. On one hand, Reconstruction wrote freedom, citizenship, and voting rights into the Constitution. But on the other hand, the nation then abandoned the effort to actually enforce those rights for almost another 100 years. So was it a success? A failure? Or maybe was it America's first real attempt at a multiracial democracy? A revolution that, to this day, simply remains unfinished.